Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, debt slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, Nazis. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk a little bit about this whole thing where they say Trump is Hitler. And it's pretty ridiculous. And but it's really interesting because, as I've mentioned in numerous videos, we live in this age of social media. We live in this age of outrageous rhetoric by the politicians and the media. And this stuff just gets pounded into people's heads. And now a lot of people on the left believe that Trump is Hitler. And one of the things I want to mention is that it's an age-old political trick, and it's been used for 80 years, ever since the real Hitler was around. And it's been used numerous times, both Noriega in Panama and Saddam Hussein in Iraq used to be U.S. friends, but once the U.S. turned on him, then all of a sudden Saddam Hussein is the next Hitler. And Noriega, the CIA ended up planting pictures of Hitler on Noriega's desk to show that he was a Nazi. And Assad in Syria has been called a Hitler. The Khomeini in Iran's been called a Hitler. Putin's been called a Hitler. And at one time or another, almost all politicians in the United States have been called a Hitler. And at one point, opponents to Franklin Delano Roosevelt even referred to him as a fascist and America's Hitler. And so ever since Hitler was around, it's been a bit of political tool, and it works really well. I mean, look how well it's worked now, where we have half the country who thinks that Trump is going to be the next Hitler. And I would interject that these accusations that he's the new Hitler and he's a fascist and he's going to round everybody up and put them in internment camps and he's going to suspend the Constitution and there won't be any elections anymore. It just seems so silly. It'd be really silly if it wasn't so dangerous. But let's remember, Trump was already president for 4 years. He wasn't an existential threat to democracy. He wasn't Hitler. He didn't put anybody in internment camps. He didn't suspend the Constitution. He didn't suspend elections, nothing like that. He was just like a normal politician. But, of course, the latest thing is this whole Madison Square Garden rally where there apparently was nearly 100,000 people. There's 20,000 inside and over 75,000 outside. Well, incredible turnout. And amazingly, leftist politicians and the media came out and described it as trying to recreate the Nazi rally of 1939 that was held at Madison Square Garden. Well, first of all, most Americans have never heard of the fact that there was a Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden in 1939, but it doesn't change the fact that it really works well as far as inflammatory rhetoric and ridiculous accusations. And the one Democratic politician after another is coming out, and the media pundits are coming out and making that comparison over and over again, and it just sounds so ridiculous. I mean, if they want to make an analogy, why don't they point out the fact that the very first WrestleMania was at Madison Square Garden in 1985? So the Trump rally at Madison Square Garden actually has more in common with WrestleMania than it does with a bunch of Nazis. But the other thing I think is interesting, just a side note, it would be a lot harder to characterize Trump as Hitler if he was the young, soft-spoken Democratic Trump that he used to be. But now that he's old and crotchety and calls people names, I guess it's easier to call him a Nazi and call him Hitler. But one of the fascinating things to me is not only is it an age-old political trick, but there's actually some academics attached to it now. There's something that came out in 1990 called Godwin's Law of Nazi Analogies, and it's a whole school of study about the fact that on the internet, as an online discussion grows longer, the probability of a comparison involving Nazis and Hitler inevitably appears. And I think that's really funny. I know I've had a lot of clashes on Facebook. Well, not so much anymore. I'm trying to be a good boy. But eventually, it's so true. Godwin's law of Nazi analogies is absolutely true. Eventually, somebody's going to come out and call somebody a Nazi, or talk about that their leader is Hitler. And I should add too that a lot of you younger people probably don't remember, but back when Obama was running for president, the LaRouche crowd used to go out and they'd set up tables outside of post offices and other public areas, and they'd have giant posters of Obama as Hitler. And so I think at one point there was tons of pictures on Google. You could look it up, and John McCain is Hitler, Mitt Romney is Hitler, Newt Gingrich is Hitler, Obama is Hitler. I mean, everyone you could imagine. There was a picture posted of them as Hitler, and so anyway, I just think that that's pretty funny. I mean, everybody's been Hitler at one point. Nobody's ever really called me a Hitler, but one of the another academics that's interesting. It's called reductio ad Hitlerum, and this was developed by Leo Strauss in 1953, and he basically realized the same thing I'm telling you right now, that it became a tactic after the real Hitler was around, and after that, it became a political tactic, and it's this reductio ad Hitlerum is basically playing the Nazi card. So, as I say, it's just a time-honored political technique, and it's pretty interesting. In fact, another side story is that um, the tobacco industry used to call people who were against smoking fascists and Nazis because Hitler was adamant about no smoking. So, of course, anybody that opposes people smoking, and I can relate to that because I've smoked before, and when it became a lot less cool to smoke, there was a lot of people that are acting like Nazis out there, confronting you and degrading you just for going outside and having a cigarette. So anyway, I think that's pretty funny. But the bottom line for me that is kind of the kernel here that's a problem is when you start calling everybody Hitler, it really degrades the quality of the real Hitler. I mean, the idea that Hitler, the value of his atrocities, the value of his specific brand of fascism, the fact that he was frickin' Adolf Hitler, it's kind of been degraded and devalued, because if you just start calling everybody Hitler, then the real Hitler really doesn't mean that much anymore, and that's kind of a sad thing. I'm Useful Idiot, don't you be one too.